begin a period of penance.
Asking for forgiveness. A bishop named in the Pennsylvania grand jury report on sex abuse celebrates Mass as the Vatican expresses shame and sorrow. Massive flooding. Rescuers continue to evacuate thousands of people stranded in India as Catholic groups pitch in to help. Called off. President Trump says his planned military parade is canceled. Who he's blaming and when the idea could be proposed again. And helping migrants. How priests in Rome are opening their doors to refugees with a green thumb. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, August 17th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Mark Irons, in for Lauren Ashburn. Crisis of confidence. Cardinal Donald Wuerl, the Archbishop of Washington, is facing a storm of criticism and calls for his resignation after becoming entangled in two major sexual abuse scandals. It's causing turmoil among the faithful well beyond the nation's capital. Correspondent ytsync-en is outside St. Matthew's Cathedral. Jason?
Mark, this is Cardinal Wuerl's cathedral, and Catholics here in the Capitol are still reeling after allegations his predecessor abused kids and adults. Now, adding even more fuel to the fire is this Pennsylvania grand jury report laying out allegations of decades of abuse. Now, Cardinal Wuerl's name is mentioned 200 times, but he's defending his record, saying he acted with diligence and concern for the victims.
Editorials in The Washington Post and The Washington Examiner both say Cardinal Donald Wuerl must go.
The words that Cardinal Wuerl has spoken since the McCarrick story came out and since the Pennsylvania story came out were not the words of a good shepherd looking after his flock. They were the words of a corporate CEO trying to sort of deflect bad publicity.
Washington Examiner commentary editor Tim Carney, a Catholic, wants an investigation led by professionals.
So far, we've seen sort of two big rocks overturned in Boston and now in Pennsylvania, and there were vipers under both of those rocks. There's a lot more rocks around this country. We need more of an investigation into what happened, and laymen need to be involved in that.
A 900-page grand jury report in Pennsylvania says as Bishop of Pittsburgh, Wuerl approved transfers for priests instead of removing them from ministry and concealed information when priests were reported to law enforcement.
Spare us lest we face your reproach forever.
Meanwhile, today in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania,
we begin a period of penance.
Bishop Ronald Gaynor celebrates a Mass of forgiveness.
These horrific actions by some members of the clergy, which violated the dignity and innocence of children, must be absolutely eliminated from the Church's life.
The grand jury report did criticize Bishop Gaynor for asking the Vatican not to defrock a priest accused of abuse. That priest had been removed from public ministry, however. The Cardinal Wuerl here in Washington, D.C., is defending his record. He says of the 19 cases that arose during his time as Bishop of Pittsburgh, he removed immediately from ministry 18 of them. And this grand jury report in Pennsylvania says mostly all of the abuse that took place there in the state of Pennsylvania took place before 2002. Mark?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi, thank you for that report. The Vatican is expressing shame and sorrow over the scathing report.
The Holy Father understands well how these crimes can affect the faith and the spirit of believers, the people in the pews, and he is concerned about that.
The comments came last night during a rare late-night statement from the Holy See press office. Vatican spokesperson Greg Burke says Pope Francis wants to assure the victims he is on their side. Alan Holdren is the EWTN Rome Bureau Chief. Alan, how are officials in the Vatican reacting to the Holy See's statement?
Well, Mark, Cardinal Raymond Burke, who's the former prefect of the Vatican's highest court, said yesterday that this is the worst crisis in the history of the Church in the United States. He lives in Rome, but he's just back from a month-long visit to the U.S. where he was able to hear from enraged Catholics. Burke told EWTNs the world over that he's never seen so many people so angry and frustrated with church leadership. I also spoke with an American priest from New England who's living and working here in Rome. He worked on a committee back when he was in his diocese in the United States that processed cases of alleged abuse in his diocese. Said that this crisis could lead to what Benedict XVI predicted, a smaller Catholic population.
And Alan, how does the Vatican's response compare to the 2002 abuse crisis?
The Vatican was quick to react to the grand jury report. This time, if you compare it to the reaction in 2002, when the Boston Globe uncovered that massive abuse scandal in the Archdiocese of Boston. Critics say that in this case it was too little too late. They say it rehashed what people already know and didn't offer solutions or promises of an investigation that people are asking for. Others say that the Vatican acted too hastily and should have issued a more measured response. Another problem observers are noting is the defensive tone of the Vatican when it noted that the abuse in Pennsylvania took place before the early 2000s.
And all of this comes just days ahead of the World Meeting of Families in Dublin, Ireland. That's an international conference that will focus on marriage and the family. The crisis will certainly be on people's minds at that conference, Alan.
That's right, Mark. Cardinal Donald Wuerl of Washington, Cardinal Joseph Tobin of Newark, New Jersey, and also Cardinal Kevin Farrell are all expected to be there and participating, and all of them are under fire for how they dealt with this crisis. Wuerl was named more than 200 times in that Pennsylvania grand jury report, and he's under the microscope at the moment for his alleged failure to act as Bishop of Pittsburgh, not to mention the ongoing pressure he faces over the McCarrick scandal. Theodore McCarrick, of course, was his immediate predecessor in Washington, D.C. Pope Francis accepted his resignation earlier this summer from the College of Cardinals and removed him from public ministry after credible accusations of sex abuse of minors and adults came to light through the Archdiocese of New York. The president of the U.S. Bishops' Conference, Cardinal Daniel DiNardo, is now asking the Vatican for a full investigation into the life of McCarrick and his actions. All of this threatens to overshadow the World Meeting of Families in Dublin, Ireland next week, Mark.
We'll definitely be paying attention to what is said in Ireland next week. Alan Holdren, EWTN Rome Bureau Chief, thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Our partners at the Catholic News Agency have an in-depth story on new allegations against former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. 6 priests from the Archdiocese of Newark and 1 priest who was a seminarian in New York spoke to a CNA official about sexual advances McCarrick made toward them. The former Archbishop of D.C. resigned from the College of Cardinals last month and was removed from public ministry after credible allegations. The Bishop of Lincoln, Nebraska is calling on victims to report any allegations. In a letter to parishioners, Bishop James Conley says he will not dismiss any accounts. The state's Attorney General joined the bishop and is asking victims to come forward. Joining me now is Dr. Matthew Bunson, an EWTN senior contributor and senior editor at the National Catholic Register. Matthew, welcome back to the program.
Good to be with you.
So yesterday, the U.S. bishops laid out their plan to tackle this crisis. Any plan will have to adhere to church law. With that in mind, shouldn't the Vatican be taking the lead on trying to solve this problem?
Absolutely. This is profoundly essential to deal with this crisis. And we could see that in both of these statements that came out just within a few hours of each other yesterday. We had the statement from the Holy See, and then we had the statement from Cardinal DiNardo regarding the actions of the USCCB, inviting the Holy See to launch an investigation. When we look at the Holy See statement, while some are criticizing it, one of the things that you can really see in this is this one line where it talks about holding accountable the abusers and those who permitted the abuse to happen. That is a clear reference to the bishops. The Holy See is going to have to investigate this, and that is likely to take the form of what's called an apostolic visitation or a Vatican investigation here in the United States, which is virtually unprecedented.
It sounds like that could be coming now. That did happen in Chile, investigation into the sex abuse among the clergy. All the Chilean bishops offered their resignations after that investigation. The Pope accepted a few of those. Could that happen in the United States? It sounds like it could.
It very well likely will happen. What we saw from the very start of the McCarrick scandal was the inevitable movement toward this kind of a visitation. What's that going to look like? Well, we don't have all of the details. Those are going to be worked out in the coming weeks, I expect. But the name that will likely surface is Archbishop Charles Scicluna, currently in Malta, but he was for many years the key point man in the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith in handling these sex abuse cases under Joseph Ratzinger, under Pope Benedict XVI. He is the one who went to Chile. It was on the basis of his report, his massive 1,300-plus page report, that Pope Francis summoned the bishops of Chile to Rome. We'll have to see if it has such similarly dramatic results here in the United States.
Catholics in the United States want to see real change. If it doesn't come, will they start to leave the church?
The great risk here is that the moral credibility of the bishops has been severely damaged in the United States. We were promised certain things in 2002, that these cases were going to be handled properly. Now we're discovering, as this grand jury report indicated in very stark relief, that the bishops have failed us. And many of the bishops have failed us. Now the question is, how do they restore that credibility? And that's why I think we're seeing this movement toward the Holy See.
We heard Cardinal Raymond Burke, he called it the greatest crisis in American Catholic history. Do you agree with that assessment? I
have to agree fully. Cardinal Burke, I think, understands very well the dimensions of this crisis as a moral crisis, as an institutional crisis. What we're seeing as well is the need for not just institutional reform, but profound spiritual reform. And he's touched on that as a key element in any sort of ongoing serious reform that we can have. The bishops, I think, are beginning to understand that as well. As we move forward, though, as we have throughout all of church history, the Pope has to lead the way. Pope Francis is going to have to take
And he hasn't said anything just yet.
Well, we have the statement from last night. We have his...
Do you expect him to come out and speak more, say, at the World Meeting of Families, do you think?
We hope so. I mean, clearly the sex abuse crisis is now a global phenomenon that we're going to have to deal with and going into the future. For American Catholics, results now are absolutely essential. The bishops, again, understand that. Their credibility is at stake, but so, too, is the credibility of Catholicism in America as a voice in culture, exactly at a time when, because of secularism, because of the culture of death, that voice needs to be heard now more than ever, and we have to have the credibility to speak publicly.
Dr. Matthew Bunson, EWTN senior contributor and senior editor at the National Catholic Register. Thanks for being here with us.
Good to be with you.
Stay with EWTN for comprehensive coverage here on EWTN News Nightly, the Catholic News Agency, and the National Catholic Register. President Donald Trump says he is not done taking away security clearances. Now he's targeting a Justice Department official.
I think Bruce Orr is a disgrace. I suspect I'll be taking it away very quickly.
Bruce Orr is under scrutiny because his wife worked for the firm involved in producing a dossier on Trump's ties to Russia. 2 days ago, the White House revoked the security clearance of former CIA Director John Brennan. Today, President Trump says he never respected Brennan. The president says he is canceling plans for a military parade in November because the cost was, quote, ridiculously high. He is blaming Washington, D.C. officials for the price tag. The president had called for the patriotic show of force after watching France's Bastille Day celebration last year. He says he may try for a parade in the nation's capital on Veterans Day 2019. A second court in Turkey rejects an appeal to release an American pastor from house arrest. Andrew Brunson is being held on espionage and terror-related charges. He denies the claims. Today's decision upholds a lower court ruling and dashes hopes of a quick solution to the dispute between Istanbul and Washington. Yesterday, President Trump said on Twitter, "We will pay nothing for the release of an innocent man, but we are cutting back on Turkey." 2 Palestinians are killed and another 60 are injured by Israeli soldiers after a protest along the Gaza border. Demonstrators threw rocks and fire bombs at troops. The violence comes as Egypt tries to broker a ceasefire. Hamas has led weekly border protests that began at the end of March. Nearly 175 protesters have been killed. Israel says it is defending its border and accuses militants of attacking soldiers.
Ave Maria, piena di grazia, il Signore è con te.
Today, the first funerals for victims of the Genoa bridge collapse were held. 4 men, all in their 20s, were laid to rest at the Basilica of the Holy Cross in Naples. A state funeral in Genoa will be celebrated tomorrow. At least 38 people were killed in the disaster that occurred on a busy highway between Italy and France. And at least 160 people are dead after unprecedented flooding in southern India. Heavy rains over the past 8 days triggered the floods. Caritas India and other Catholic groups are providing blankets, mosquito nets, and hygiene kits to the evacuees. Coming up, analysis on the church's response to the Pennsylvania grand jury report. And not your garden variety of help for migrants. Welcome back. I'm Mark Irons in for Lauren Ashburn. As the Catholic Church formulates its next steps in handling the sex abuse crisis, lay Catholics continue to try to make sense of the scandal. Joining us now by Skype from Miami is Dr. Grazie Christie, Policy Advisor for the Catholic Association. Grazie, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
As a lay Catholic and a mother of 5 children participating fully in the life of the Church, how has this crisis impacted you and your family?
You know, as a mother, trying to read even the redacted report it was almost impossible because, you know, to us, our children are these perfect purities. And to think of anyone touching even a hair on their heads with evil intent, and in fact, vile intent, is almost more than we can bear to think of. You know, and as a lay Catholic, we are heartbroken for the entire Church. We're heartbroken not just for the victims, but for this terrible crisis that all of us find ourselves part of, all of us together.
I'm sure you've been paying attention to the different solutions being proposed. The bishops want a full investigation with lay people involved. Does this seem like the right approach?
You know, that sounds like a good idea. And you were speaking earlier on the show about an apostolic visitation, and that also sounds wonderful. We need all the help we can get. But I think it's also a question that goes beyond procedures. I mean, procedures are important, and children are safe in the Church, but they have to be perfectly safe. So that has to be done immediately. Everything that can be done must be done. But it's also a question of a spiritual crisis. I think the Church, somehow we've lost our way. We've disconnected ourselves from ideas of purity and ideas of chastity, and we have to re-engage with that and start living our faith, that part of our faith, more deeply.
Do we need to see resignations now? Would you like to see the bishops who were involved in the cover-ups resign?
You know, I personally don't have special information about who did what and how. But I think that if anybody in a position of leadership or not in a position of leadership feels that they are part of the rot of the problem, then that's a choice they ought to make.
And I want to ask you, what would you say to Catholics who are brokenhearted for the victims, but also for the Church in general with this latest crisis?
I think that God is giving the Church a rough shaking, and only the unshakable will remain. No, God is pure, and he wants purity from us. And whatever is lovely and beautiful should stay, and whatever is not love and beauty needs to go, needs to leave our Church and needs to leave our hearts, all of our hearts.
And you referred to this as a spiritual crisis. So how do you address that? How do you address the sin that caused this?
I think we need to address it, obviously, as an institution, the sin of infidelity, the sin of unchastity, the sin of putting our desires before the will of God and the way we ought to treat each other, especially the most vulnerable amongst us. But we also need to apply those lessons to ourselves, to our own lives, to the way we treat each other. Us just regular lay Catholics, we need to also be those pure people, those people of love that God wants us to be.
Some good points right there. Dr. Grazie Christie, Policy Advisor for the Catholic Association. Thank you for being here.
Thanks.
Up next, the King and Queen of Spain mark a somber anniversary in Barcelona 1 year after a deadly attack. And migrants and a Catholic order provide food for thought in Italy. Welcome back. I'm Mark Irons, in for Lauren Ashburn. The head of the Mormon Church says the religion now should only be referred to by its full name, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. President Russell Nelson claims God directed him to make the change. The Utah-based faith has 16 million members worldwide. Barcelona marks the first anniversary of terror attacks that killed 16 people. The country's king and queen attended a ceremony today. The commemorations included victims' families laying flowers in remembrance. ISIS claimed responsibility after a van mowed down scores of pedestrians on a famous city street. As Pope Francis continues to call for compassion toward migrants, Vincentian priests in Rome have opened their doors to refugees with a green thumb. Vatican correspondent Juliet Lindley reports.
Our hope for this project for it to grow more, for it to go like worldwide so everybody will know about it.
Raphael loves the smell and feel of the flowers. For the Nigerian Catholic refugee, they're his future. He's one of 12 refugees seeking asylum in Italy who run Mediterranea, a flower and vegetable garden. It's a bustling business on 5 acres of land owned by the Society of St. Vincent de Paul in Rome. 25-year-old Angela, also from Nigeria, is a colleague.
I feel so happy because they are very nice to all of us, not only me. So I'm very happy. I'm grateful to be in this project.
Each migrant takes home about $460 per month. Father Giuseppe Carulli, who founded the project, shows me homemade rosemary salt and lavender sugar produced here. He says it's about changing the system and living out the gospel mandate to help the poor. And the organically grown produce is popular with city dwellers.
The project is aptly named Mediterranea. As the logo shows, you can see the Mediterranean Sea. It represents the Mediterranean cultures, but also that very sea that so many migrants and refugees put their lives in peril to cross to seek a better future for themselves.
Lydia, a volunteer, is dedicated to building that future.
It's so important for me to speak with them and to open my mind.
The refugees working here tell me they pray this garden inspired by St. Vincent de Paul will become a model that other religious orders can replicate around the world. In Rome, Juliette Lindley, EWTN News Nightly.
Finally tonight, we are days away from the start of the World Meeting of Families in Dublin. EWTN News Nightly will be providing daily updates from Ireland. Our coverage begins on Monday with a report from Dublin. Pope Francis arrives there next weekend. Stay with us here and on social media for all the action. We thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Mark Irons. We'll be back up Monday with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night and God bless.